let's talk about Canelo Alvarez. We will get to the UFC in just a second, but we want to start with the biggest fight of the weekend. It was clearly Canelo Alvarez defeating Gennadiy Golovkin via unanimous decision. Now, the good news in the broader picture, BC, and you would probably agree with this, is that this was the most definitive of the three in either direction. Canelo was clearly better than Gennadiy Golovkin. However, the fight was not great at all. And even with Alvarez winning, that was not it wasn't a terrible performance from him, but it was hardly his best. So, explain to me in your best way possible, why was this fight so lackluster despite Canelo being so clearly better?
You know, it was the perfect storm of a bunch of factors that could have produced a fight that was past its time and not necessarily necessary. In the end, that's exactly what happened. Now, sometimes it doesn't happen. Marquez Pacquiao 4, the comparison we had coming into this, if we were romanticizing what the perfect ending for this rivalry could be, and that shocked people, right? That was an outlier where it was not only the fourth meeting, which is sometimes the saddest if you get that far. Think Vasquez Marquez with that forgettable fourth meeting. But, customer fatigue, all that. But they were aging enough that they slowed down to be more vulnerable. And I think we underestimated the hatred and the fire for one another. None of that matriculated into this third meeting, even with some of the parallels. Should we have had more fears about what Gennadiy would look like at 40 in hindsight? Of course. I mean, you only have to go back 5 months and watch the Ryota Murata fight in Japan and see him get hurt to the body against a non-puncher before rallying and getting the knockout. But not only did we hope that wouldn't play into this fight, I think we hope that the combination of look, there are levels to how jacked up a fighter will commit to training camp. I mean, it's different. If you're Gennadiy even at 40, I think we said to ourselves, look, you're fighting the career rival, the guy you hate the most. There's so much at stake. He's going to pour out whatever's left. Look, it just turned out that whatever was left was way worse than we expected, it wouldn't have been a killer. I think my dissatisfaction is really of the entertainment value, which happens. We didn't get what we could have gotten. And even if Gennadiy came in old, you say to yourself, okay, well, Canelo's going to take care of him. And if he does it decisively, if not spectacularly, boy, is that a flag in the ground to close this rivalry. Well, unfortunately, the other side of it was we didn't get any of that from Canelo. So whether it is 75% because of the injured left wrist that he's claiming needs surgery, or whether we may have to look a little bit closer at this fight in the combination of the Bivol loss to the idea that at 32 after turning pro at 15, Canelo's also aging too and may not be that guy. Either way, Luke, it came together for a boring fight, one that I thought was more or less completely one-sided despite Gennadiy rallying late to at least pick up his output, and a fight that was almost a debacle on the scorecards when all was said and done. So, it's a shit sandwich served in a men's room, Luke. I mean, that's what it turned out to be. That's harsh. It wasn't as bad of a fight as I'm saying, but the expectations after the first two were obviously through the roof. There was enough stakes and interest and emotions into this. We should have had a better fight. We didn't. I'm glad the right guy won at least, but anybody in the past 48 hours trying to say that this fight was close? Nope. That the scores were right? Nope. That either guy was impressive in their performance? Nope. It was just one of those times that happens, Luke. They make a big fight. Duran-Leonard 3 is a good comparison, and it just sucks the horn. What were your biggest takeaways on how we got here, Luke?
But I have a bunch more questions for you, and I'll use what I'm thinking as a way to pitch to you, because you watched it live, and so I watched it after the fact. You can get a different reaction to things when you already see the headlines, and then you watch the fight like I did. So let me say this, let me pitch it to you this way. Canelo at the post-fight presser was asked about David Benavidez, who, by the way, is in this weight class is a very deserving contender. And I realized
former two-time champion.
Right. And he has the interim title, I think, for WBC at 168, which doesn't mean much, but still, but if you're looking to who to fight at this weight class, this is the next guy. He got asked about it, and Canelo seemed almost offended. I'm not going to ask you, did Canelo phone in this whole thing? He trains too hard, blah, blah, blah. But I did get the feeling that, I don't know how to say this exactly, or rather than this. Did you get the feeling that Canelo almost didn't want to be there. Like he was going to do enough to get the win, but after that, he like was not interested in participating in this thing anymore.
So remember I said, I had fears about his motivations coming in, and I interviewed him for 4 minutes, but in that, satellite interview where it's, one after another, I was like, okay, he's selling to me that there is real animosity here, that he wants to finish with a knockout and end Golovkin's career. And, that didn't translate. And look, if the injury is completely real, then that certainly explains parts of it. I also think he's aging because he did turn pro at 15 and had so many huge fights in his early 20s and fought everybody and fought on a killer schedule, by the way, that eventually will catch up with you. You fight two years in a row of 4 fights a year at this level, it's going to catch up with you. But most importantly, Luke, the motivation was not there. It didn't look like the second half, especially in rounds 9 through 12, as Golovkin is finally showing a pulse and is finally coming forward. It didn't look like the thing that I think I feared most for Gennadiy was that Canelo would utilize the emotions at play and would basically say, fuck this guy for talking about steroids about me all that time. I'm going to make him pay. Now, that wasn't there at all. And I think that was disappointing for a guy who, I've been trying to argue is still my pound-for-pound king. He didn't look like it in this fight. I think the emotions played a big part, and that's why, to some degree, neither man really worked hard to sell this fight marketing-wise, which wasn't a surprise because of their personalities, but still, neither man sold it in the ring. I mean, Luke, as much as okay, was there a Triple G rally? Well, okay, there was. But rounds 1 through 8, the guy didn't do a damn thing. So it was, much ado about nothing in the end in that regard. All
right. So second follow-up here. Canelo looked, well, first of all, Triple G, to your point, I mean, I think the other we're making this about Canelo, but let's be very clear about this. Canelo did some decent work rounds 1 to 8. Decent work. And Triple G just did very little. I mean, he just did very little. He looked so old. But here's the thing that's like nagging me in the back of my head. In a lot of these fights, like for example, the Kovalev fight, he was losing that fight up until he wasn't. Do you think Canelo was like, I'm gonna sort of put in a decent effort, and if the knockout shows up, then great, and if not, by rounds 9, when Triple G was actually finally starting to do something, he kind of like mentally checked out. In other words, if the Billy Joe Saunders fight had gone the distance, if the Kovalev fight had gone the distance, would we be saying something similar about Canelo, that he looked fine, but not as remarkable as he would be but for chasing the finish finding, I should say, the finish in those particular fights? Well,
if those fights had gone 12, but the intention was there in the second half, then it would be, you could critically question that, and say, okay, did his power carry up to these weight classes? But it's all about intention. The intention wasn't there in the second half of the fight from Canelo. Was that, was his training camp compromised because of the injury? Was he gassing a bit? Was he old? There's a lot of questions right here. I thought strategically he was very smart in the first half of the fight. And, we can say Triple G looked like shit and looked like he was about 50 in the first 8 rounds. And that wouldn't be, by the way, inaccurate, but it was because the speed difference that was already there 4 and 5 years ago was heavily exasperated now with Triple G fading. And Canelo was smart, got right up behind that high guard, so he was close enough, and he countered every jab attempt that Triple G had, seemingly with a harder, quicker punch over the top. So Triple G basically was like, my A game's being taken away. But look, he never got that fight or flight, flip didn't happen. I mean, at the end of round 5, Jonathan Banks is like, I need you to believe in everything we worked for here, which is a major sign that Triple G's frustrated and has no idea what to do. So Gennadiy, I'm happy he found a second wind, but that second wind was there because Canelo wasn't fighting with a killer instinct. He wasn't fighting with a posture that suggested he was looking to find that knockout and find that climactic moment here. And that could have been also, Luke, a fear of Gennadiy's punching power, knowing how tough this guy is. Certainly could have been. But I think it all conspired again to a fight that, half the people weren't all that jazzed coming in, and nobody was on the way out. And I hold that Benavidez talk, though, until we get there on what's next for Canelo, because more on that topic.
Okay, so I want to get to that in just a minute, but I guess the thing that was... Okay, so that's a fair response. The other part I was going to ask about this was, to what extent was it being at 168 made them both, relatively speaking, a little lethargic? I wonder if that played a role. But let's talk about what's next for Canelo, because here's my thing, BC. If you look at the performance he had against Caleb Plant, we were there for that. Dude, he was hunting Caleb Plant. He went for it. That's why he got the finish in round 11, because he had his foot on the gas about it. he really wanted it. It just seemed like he didn't want this. So, A, where is Canelo going to go? In other words, does he re-sign with Eddie Hearn, who he seems to have a great relationship with, but like delivered on a fight where he lost and then was ultimately lackluster in the second one? Because if he's not going to fight Benavidez, I don't know what the fuck he's going to do other than the Bivol rematch, which I got to say at this point seems like a bad idea. I don't love that for him at all. Lay out the future of Canelo here in all those respects.
Yeah, so the Benavidez thing is just hovering over this. He's the most deserving in the division, as you mentioned, for the undisputed 4-belt champion, which is Canelo. Benavidez, former champion twice, lost it because of his own wrongdoing, but came back and has won big fights and gotten back to it. Canelo's reason, it seems, for not fighting him in terms of not necessarily what he says, but what his actions say is, well, hey, how hard can we criticize this guy when he's going one division higher, which is clearly, we found out against Bivol in the last fight, and parts of the Kovalev fight, meaning it took Canelo a long time to kind of really get into that fight. He had to be careful on the outside, was that this is a division that's probably one step too far from him. So should Canelo completely focus, which he said he would after the fight, on getting healthy and then getting back in there to beat Bivol, not only could that open up more fights in that realm at 175, the Joe Smith better be winner. I mean, if he gets a chance to fight for all 4 belts at 175 in a division he probably shouldn't even be in, Luke, it's going to be hard to like get on him about this Benavidez thing. But I did say one thing when we talked about this probably about 6 months ago. If we get into 2023 and early in the year, there's no like immediate plans for Benavidez, meaning let me take care of Bivol first because I'm a competitor and this means a lot to me and I feel like I can beat him. But as long as, but hey guys, don't worry. I'm going to be back at 68 to close the year, so start hyping up this big Benavidez fight now, right? Mexico versus Mexican-American, both warriors, pure, this is the fight. You can say from Canelo's post-fight comments about Benavidez that might not be the best look, words-wise right now. Because again, actions-wise, if he chases, can you say he's ducking Benavidez when he's going up in weight, Luke? And potentially, if he keeps going there, could end up fighting better beef? Dude, you really can't rip him that much. But I do want him to handle the topic of Benavidez appropriately. So that soundbite you talked about, I think the reason why it came out extra nasty was Sean Zettel, I think that's how you say his last name. He's on Sean Porter's podcast, a journalist out of Las Vegas. He was the one that asked it, but he asked it under the guise of...
Is that the skinny white guy that's on the program?
Yes.
Yeah, he's pretty knowledgeable.
I like that guy a lot, by the way. He's a real nice guy. He asked it under the guise of, like, you've said in the past you won't fight Mexicans, so, like... Benavidez is Mexican-American, so will you fight him? And Canelo took issue because he's trying to say, look, you can write whatever headlines you want. I said I won't fight against Mexico, meaning the nation, because that's who I am and where I'm from. But in terms of actual opponents, I don't give a fuck. I'll fight Benavidez. I don't care about him. And then Canelo went on to essentially rip Benavidez's resume. He's clearly upset that Benavidez's father and trainer is trashing him in the media left and right. And he basically said, look, you fought, Anthony Durrell, one champion. Shut the fuck up. So, Luke, here's the deal. Unless I start hearing Canelo saying, yes, I will fight that guy. Let me just finish this off first. I'm not going to lie. The optics are starting to not look good. Even though 175 is bigger fish to fry, Benavidez just happens to be that boogeyman guy that everybody has said from the beginning. Either Canelo won't fight him, or when he finally does, he's going to find real trouble because that guy's got everything that the other people are missing, right? Size, backbone, all that stuff. Skill, intention, everything. If you want to start to say this is the beginning of a duck move, you can certainly find fuel there. I'm going to still hold Canelo right now to the benefit of the doubt in the idea that, the Bivol fight is not easy. We just saw him lose it. Is this a bad idea? Well, sometimes competitors, Luke, have to find that out. They go back to the well for a rematch and get humbled again. I'm not going to be mad at him. What's your breaking point? At what point are you going to say, personally, as a boxing fan, that, all right, Canelo, let's take care of business now with this dude, Benavidez?
Well, it's fairly simple to understand. I mean, I think you're right? You can give Canelo more breathing room than you would another unified champ by virtue of what else he is attempting. Fighting the Bivol one, you can admire the courage. It's not like he's fighting some chump. Again, he's fighting a guy who beat him. There's something to be said for that. But it all comes back down to the architecture of boxing, BC. Here's where I'm at. My guy, Canelo, You have all the belts at 168. You can't have all the belts at 168 and then say, I'm not going to fight number one contenders. Yeah, do you have to fight David Benavidez next? No, right? I think that's fair. You don't have to fight him next. I don't think, okay. I don't know when exactly you have to fight him, but at some point, if you're going to have those titles, and those titles are not his only claim to fame, but his current part of what makes his status what it is, right? The first guy to ever unify at super middleweight. At some point, dude, you got to defend them against the most deserving people if you want to retain them. I suppose he could give them up and go do other things. But you see, that is also his right. He doesn't have to. But you can't keep them and then not defend them. David Benavidez, now maybe, here's the thing. Now maybe Canelo will change his tune if they are able to make, which by the way, there's some beef between them, a David Benavidez and Caleb Plant fight. There is something to be said for that. Now, maybe that changes the game, but at some point, BC, you have the belts. You have a responsibility to defend them.
Because the hole in Canelo's argument is you're saying Benavidez hasn't beaten big names or accomplished much, yet how can you win a title if you're holding them all? It's true. But I do think the flip side of that is all of these guys need to fight each other who haven't. And I think that's a fair thing to say. Canelo is the undisputed champion, so he's already proven dominance over this division. If Benavidez, by the way, hadn't lost his belt twice, one for drugs, one for missing weight, Canelo would have already fought him to become undisputed champion in theory, right? So the working theory is, okay, Benavidez, how about you go out there and just take care of the business of the other contenders, meaning Caleb Plant, former champion who you guys have had that beef. I think if Benavidez does that, his next big fight, then there'd be no argument. And if Canelo didn't respond after that by setting up the groundwork for a fight, then it's full on duck. And I don't think Canelo actually fears him. I think Canelo's just pissed off that his dad's running his mouth. I do think Canelo recognizes it's going to be a very tough challenge. I just want to be careful that we don't wait too long because, I watched Canelo wait out Triple G for a year and a half to 2 years so that he was, 36 by the time they fought. So, I saw him wait 4 more years for this fight, although I don't think he was waiting Triple G out this time. I think he just didn't care about the fight or want it, but DAZN, the fans, boxing kind of made it happen again. No foul there.
And also, BC, hold on. I understand Canelo's point a little bit when he's like, look at the status. He didn't say this exactly, but this is basically his argument. Look at the status I have achieved by all my accomplishments. Look at the status that David Benavidez has achieved by virtue of his accomplishments. There's a massive gap there. So for me to award this guy a fight, he has much more to gain than I do. I understand that. That's utterly reasonable. But if you don't want to fight him, you can't just have the titles. They're not yours to keep in perpetuity. They are there's an architecture in place by which they have to be maintained. If you want to be part of that, then you've got to honor it, or just drop the belt and then do what you want. Either way, I won't judge, but I just can't stand someone sitting on the title and then not defending it. And of course, eventually the sanctions bodies will get involved.
Why we got so outraged when the WBC started this bullshit super champion status, which basically was set up for Canelo, knowing he's a massive star, knowing he jumps around in divisions. It's basically saying, we love you so much, you bring us so much money and attention, we don't even care if you campaign in this division, you'll always be our champion. I mean, it doesn't, mandatories aren't affected by it, it's just absolute trash. But the reason why I'm being so critical about this, to close on this, is because Canelo has won our respect over so huge over the things he's done the past couple of years and the way he's carried himself that I want to talk about him like he's a badass, because he is. I want to argue for his pound for pound ship, because whether it's the fans or his commitment to his legacy, like he always deliver, or making big fights, he always seems to deliver. But he's not getting any younger. So if I don't hear him start recognizing that there's a fight out there that the fans think you need to take, then I'm going to turn, and I don't want to. So, you know what I mean? I want to have that same respect for him. So, but it is a business, and going to 175 and fighting for titles is not easy. Luke, if he beats, let's say he outboxes Bivol in the rematch or whatever. Let's say he wins it. There's, could you deny him the chance at going up to fight Beterbiev for all 4 belts? I mean, that's a crazy ass tough fight.
It would be amazing. Well, last question on this, then I promise before our audience has a mutiny, we will get to the UFC stuff. In terms of Triple G, dude, he looked... In the Murata fight, he looked old, but then had a much better rally. And he had a bit of a rally here, but it was way too little, way too late. He indicated he wanted to keep boxing. I'm sure he could still beat some guys, But I got to tell you, man, that was not an inspiring performance. That was the first time I was like, wow, he looks old. What do you think will or should be next for Triple G?
I think he should retire, but he gave that speech. He was like almost like a one-liner he threw out there of like, I know, he did the whole bit, but the whole speech was like, I'm still the unified champion in this other division where I've only lost once, and that's to this guy or this, all-time great right here. So I just think he in his mind, for whatever reason, whether it's the competitor in him or whether he realizes, even if I go out there and lose 2 more times in super big fights, the paydays will be big. He made 20, what did he make, 20 million for this? He finally, at the end of his career, started making big time money. Could he go in there against the remaining middleweight studs he hasn't faced? Guys like Jermall Charlo, right? Guys potentially like Demetrius Andrade, although he moved up to 168. And can he have the type of fights where, he's going to be slower and he's going to have to take on big damage, but, he lingers and fights, and could he get a knockout? Yeah, he could. He could have that repeat against Murata in theory, but Murata's also not a puncher. And some of these guys, if he gets the best version of Jermall Charlo, that version could kick his ass, Luke. So,
right, badly.
And I think that's why these scores being closer than they should have been, 8 rounds to 4, 7 rounds to 5 twice, which was not the fight we saw. Even with Canelo taking his foot off the gas. Even with this comeback, which was Triple G actually just sticking to the game plan because now he wasn't getting countered as clean anymore, and he just kind of went for it. Okay, he didn't brawl, but he kind of went for it. Even with that as being fool's gold to him, he has to know, Luke, that there's not a ton left. I hope he knows that. I hope this is more financial thinking, maybe I can beat these guys like a Charlo, but it's a big fight. I'll make a lot of money on the way out. I'm thinking he's trying to be strategic here, Luke, but, he can't look at this and go, okay, that's Canelo, and I rallied and almost won. No, you didn't. You didn't rally. And I know a lot of people are coming back at me, BC, you listened too hard to the DAZN team. They were only focused on Canelo. They were kind of only focused on Canelo. I'll agree with you with that. But that didn't manipulate my score. I saw what I saw. Luke, what did you see? What was your score loosely, roughly watching that? 10 rounds to 2?
Yeah, I gave generously. I gave Triple G three okay. rounds. But that, 2. I think you've got 2 clear rounds, and I was sort of being generous about one of them. That's it. I mean, it was to me, Canelo won that one easily.